Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, call hello Yahweh, Shem Yahushua, Shem Kokwadash, and of course, once again, double honors. Go out to the apostles, bishops, and elders, great millstone. Salutations to the other Akim out there on the four corners of this earth, preaching this gospel in all honesty and truth. All right, trying to wake up the remaining hopefully elect. All right, so this is Nama with the DC camp, and this particular story happens to be about what happened in the district some a little over 30 years ago now, but it addresses all the crime and everything. And this is originally from the Huffington Post, and it says opinion. The murder capital, where they murdered for capital, was by American design. All right, and let me say before I get started, I repeat, I am not glorifying anything here, because let's face it, our people are wicked. However, what this article is going into is how Jake was set up, and I think we all realize that, all right, and can accept that. Jake had help, and again, as it says here, it was by American design. You have to realize we as a people are the enemy of this establishment. The elites know who we are, and because of us being out there on the highways and byways, the videos and everything, especially within the last couple of years with this, well, you know what, people had a lot more time on their hands. Actually, all they could do was watch YouTube and other media outlets, social media in particular. And now more as a result, more and more. But again, that was prophecy. That's Psalms 19 and 4 and Romans 10 and 18. All right. So about the word going out over the face of the earth, and by what? The unicorn being what? Over the airwaves. All right. So trust me, you get these little weird looks while you're walking down the street by certain people. More than likely, they've seen a video. Oh. But it's good to, well, me personally, I think it's good to see these Edomites sweat. They can sense that, this is it. But let's address this video. That's a whole nother video. Hold on. What did I do? Whoops. Here we go. Once again, it's from the Huffington Post. It says opinion. The murder capital, where they murdered for capital, was by American design. All right. It says Washington, D.C. paramedics work on a shooting victim in 1993. Young Jake there. This is a neighborhood knucklehead that we'll call Payphone had backed down Ray over something that was far beyond my age. This was back in 1984 when drugs were plentiful and Washington, D.C. didn't have a drug task force. And new money meant urban opulence like Jettas and BBS rims, cell phones the size of cinder blocks, and soft fabric Fila sweatsuits. Ray was a local boxer who did more working out than actual boxing. He wore gray sweatsuits, and whenever he ran through the neighborhood, he shadow boxed the air. He skipped rope outside of the corner store on First and Bryant, which is where I was the day I saw the gun. Payphone held an MCM tote bag and told Ray to come into the alley. He made it sound like he wanted to fight. Ray shouted back. That's when Payphone pulled the gun out of his clutch bag. What shocks me most about that day, looking back on it, was that I didn't run. I wasn't even nervous. At 8, it was already embedded in me that this was the way, showing that, again, the difference in our children and the oppressors. All right, going into Job 21st chapter. Let's get that real quick, because this is what this is getting into. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Job 21. All right. Let's start at Start at 9. Talking about these Edomites, how they look at you even. It's like, what are you doing on my planet? You know, after all the wickedness they've done. But anyway, Job 21 and 9 says, their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of the Most High upon them. Their bull gendereth and faileth not. Their cow calveth and casteth not her calf. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They take the timbrel and harp and rejoice at the sound of the organ. They spend their days in wealth, and in a moment go down to the grave. All right. I'll read 14. It says, therefore they say unto the Most High, depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. 15. What is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what profit should we have if we perish him? Because, let's face it, these devils, these so-called white people, these Edomites, their God is science. All right. It says, continuing on, it says, remember, he's telling you at 8 years old, all right, this was something that was embedded in him. This is just the way things are. This is a child, mind you. All right. But in this society, our children aren't looked at as children. You have to know that by now. All right. If you don't, parallel universe or whatever, I don't know. What. Anyway, continuing on, it says, I was 12 when I held my first gun. My next door neighbor was worried after an altercation with a group of girls that she was going to get jumped. She got a gun from her boyfriend, a silver .22 caliber that she left with me because she didn't want her parents to find it. I was 14 when I shot my first gun. It was in the woods near my house. I was drunk. It could have ended badly. I was 15 when people dubbed my home the murder capital after a particularly brutal and violent end of 1991. I remember that. It says, that was the same year I learned never to touch a gun, or if I did, to clean off the prints. I also knew that if the price was really low, it was probably used in a shooting and the seller was just trying to get rid of it quickly. I was 16 when the first kid I knew got killed. It wouldn't be the last. I was 18 when my friends and I popped the hood of the car and hid the guns near the engine before going into the go-go, because everyone knew that leaving guns in the car meant someone would break your windows to steal them. This was despite the fact that D.C., which still has some of the weirdest gun laws in the country, had not one gun shop, gun range, or legal place to hunt in the city, yet there were guns all around. And this is not particular to D.C. This is in urban cities, in cities throughout, urban areas throughout this country. And we all know that if you've ever seen the series Snowfall, it gives you, that is one wicked ass show, but it gives you supposedly loosely based wink wink on Freeway Ricky Ross out in LA. But it shows you how the government was involved in the setting up of the crack epidemic, all right, in Jake's neighborhoods. And there was a reporter in the early 90s, I want to say 92, somewhere around there, that actually proved that. And all of a sudden he gets double tapped in the head, all right, and they said it was a suicide, whatever, all right. But yeah, this is the game that they play, and it's not just limited to crack. All the shit was put in our hoods, even going back to the cocaine, the heroin, hell, just plain liquor, which is probably uh, one of the worst out of all those. All right, because it's legal, but along with cigarettes and everything else. But yeah, it's from the times, the games they played with the cities that we built, they were burned down for. I mean, the reasons that they give, they just looking for excuses to do so, because let's face it, some of Jake, being that we were in hardcore chattel slavery up until 1865, and it didn't take but 1 or 2 generations for Jake to start to outdo the oppressor, and that sparked what? Jealousy and envy. All right, and they needed excuses to do what they did. We tried getting away from them, establishing our own, trying to find our own little happiness, which we didn't understand, a lot of us, because we had our heritage stripped away from us. You know, it's just not going to work on this side. All right, this is not our rest, as Micah 2:10 says. All right, and then get into Hebrews chapter 11. You know, we look for, actually, let's get that real quick, because I don't want to butcher it. This is something that, this is never going to be, this is Hebrews 11. This is the faith chapter, and it goes into the faith hall of fame. All right, Moses, Abraham, even Sarah. This is verse 14. For they, speaking of those that I just mentioned, for they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country, because they've never been right since the days of David and Solomon, you know, in particular, because that was 40 years of peace, and we've been tossed about to and fro ever since then. This is verse 15. It says, and truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, which I just spoke of, all right, they might have had an opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, in heavenly. Wherefore the Most High is not ashamed to be called their power, for he hath prepared for them a city. This is what we're looking forward to. We don't have to put up with shit like this. And our people, considering what we had gone through, the levels that we attained, as far as, you know, we put to rest that old fucking Darwinism bullshit, and, you know, that we were just by nature inferior and all that. No, but they couldn't have that. These are reminders that, well, that was a lie to begin with. So now some of the cities, towns, or whatever, they're under lakes where these Edomites go and have their fun. Never mind what's beneath it. But then we know Numbers 35 and 33 states that the blood that was shed, the only way that can be corrected is for the blood of those that shed. All right, it has to be that has to be to square things. You know, the oppressor's blood has to be shed. There's no other way. Anyway, continuing on, it says, this was the product of a crack war that hooked a whole city. It was also the byproduct of lack, devastation. Now, the examples I just gave, remember, we put to rest all that shit. Well, they're lazy, they're, you know, this and that and that. So you have to question, well, you don't even have to question, but you begin to see the picture now, how these devils, with all these so-called amendments, the Reconstruction era, Jim Crow, all these things, we were targeted. Now it's going to go into what I just told you. It says, this was the byproduct of a crack war that hooked the whole city. It was also the byproduct of lack, devastation, and epidemic, and even slavery. Yes, slavery. Though none of us would admit it, and that's the problem with Jake. They just want to distance themselves and like it never happened. No. because of shame, you know, our people are just, anyway, so none of us would admit it. All of the risks we took, all the chances that could have led to death or jail were merely to have access to things we couldn't afford. All right. Oh man, I keep doing that. Anyway, and here they go for the auctions and public sale of slaves. This is 1863. All right. So continuing on, goes into General Sherman. He put an end to, this is down in Georgia, the business of slave auctions. Anyway, continuing on, it says European settlers came to the so-called New World looking for gold. Instead, they found land and people. Land they wanted and people they were prepared to enslave, kill, or displace in order to have that land. Don't you dare believe all that bullshit you were taught in school about these criminals that came over here from England, talking about they were escaping religious persecution. All right, you've got issues if you still believe that bullshit. Anyway, it says, and then because minding, building, and getting wealth out of American soil is hard work, they say, they still call us African. People to come to the United States to toll for free under 400 years of slavery and build this country to what it is today. God dang it, Slocky, just sensitive there. The U.S. became what President Ronald Reagan once called that shining city on a hill. Oh, senile bastard. It's AKA the wealthiest country in the world, where you have the opportunity to get rich or literally die trying, sometimes through violence. Because what? This country was founded on violence and it's going out that way. That's just the way it is. We can talk about what's owed to indigenous people or the descendants of those who were enslaved, but nobody's paying, and they won't. That's why we want true reparations. We want biblical reparations. And that's doing to them what they did to us, but giving them double per Revelation 18th chapter. All right? Because in America, the ends justify the means, even if the means are, I don't have something, so I'm willing to kill and or destroy lives to get it. All right, see? Some of these jakes took two, although you still had a choice. All right? But it was so easy, and it was that way for a reason. All right? It's why we celebrate genocidal maniacs, slave owners, and sociopaths. Because for those who benefited from their violence, they got the job done. And they're absolutely right in saying this, because look at these old dead presidents. What did they do? The majority of them from that time period own us. Did they not? How did they get their money? How did they acquire their wealth, I should say, because we're talking generational stuff here, which they, all right, kept us from acquiring. All right. In America, the ends justify the means. And I just read that even if the means are, I don't have something, so I'm willing to kill and or destroy lives to get it. Look what this country did overseas in all their wars. Remember, since this country's inception, there's only been like 4 years of peace, something like that. I forget the exact numbers. Out of, we're at 246th year now. I think 224 or something like that have been about war, either due direct or by proxy. Wow. Because you're dealing with a bloody, violent nation of people. No matter, we're talking about America in particular, but it doesn't matter if they call themselves American, French, British, which America came out of, Dutch, Sweden, whatever, Belgian, German, Italian, Russian, they're all Edomites. South African, Australian, whatever. All right, that's just their nature. And more people are seeing that now, and they don't want anything to do with these pieces of shit. And these same said people are panicking now. You're seeing more and more how things are speeding up. They're trying to establish this new world order because they know Revelation 12th chapter. You need to read it. Because that woman there is talking about us, the nation of Israel. All right. And that devil is talking about them. All right. And they know in verse 12, all right, that they got a short time. It says, some do it for greed, others do it for sport. Where I grew up, though, it was purely about need, about want, about lack. And lack is a monster. It creeps up on you from nowhere. And you know this, Jake is in these positions in the ghettos instead because those experiments, and that's all it was. To see how Jake operates under certain conditions. You know, they got their psychiatrists, their psychologists, all these think tank groups, in particular the one over across the pond, Tavistock Institute. They get off on shit like this. All right. It creeps on you. It creeps up on you from nowhere. Lack has a smell and a taste that sits in the back of your throat just to remind you of how much you don't have. It shrinks your clothes to the point of embarrassment. It naps your hair. It muddies your sneakers. Lack is a backbreaker and destroyer of good men. Lack is a moral bender and burden creator, because wherever there is lack, there is violence. All right? Look at our brothers down in South America, just across the border into Mexico with all that drug violence. Again, conditions created by who? Again, not making an excuse for Jake at all. Just telling you what's going on. It says, we didn't create the violence that we lived in. We inherited like spanking or passive God. I didn't grow up in the drug-fueled, war-torn 1980s by happenstance. The city was already in an unattended boiling pot on a gas stove. This wasn't black-on-black violence, which we already know is a myth. This was inherited white violence. As of 1980, more than 29 million people, 13% of the population, live below the poverty level, according to the U.S. Census. Crack hit D.C. around 1984, the same year I saw a payphone in the alley with a gun, the same year that I stopped drinking Little Hug's fruit-barreled sugar waters and started drinking Martinelli's apple juice in a brown paper bag because it looked like beer. The same year that the poverty line rose to around $10,609, or in drug parlance, about $6,000 short of a kilo of cocaine, assuming you had a South Florida connection. The violence that followed would be some of the most horrific violence the city had ever seen, but in the scope of American violence, it was the natural order. Here's another picture here. D.C. police detectives investigate the murder of a young black man, one of record 482 victims of guns in 1991. All right. It always has. Violence comes with having things. It always has. And sometimes violence leads to having things. World War I made the U.S. dollar stronger among the world's currencies. World War II spearheaded the American tax system. The Iraq War, we all know, was about oil. America's bloody history is full of violence. This is the violence that violence creates, packages, and then smells off. The elder Malcolm in Chicago often uses the example of a grenade being democracy. All right, and that's exactly true. This is what it creates, these things that are from it, and people are sick and tired. All right, you remember because America, when it goes overseas, how they're perceived. You know, it's Daniel 7, and let's get that real quick. The exceptionalism, the outright pride. This is Daniel 7 and 20. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before them 3 fell. Giving you that little history there. Even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. That American pride, exceptionalism. All right? That says, you're beneath me. Fuck you. All right? And the thing that a lot of Americans, well, as of now, they're paying more attention to it, but it's too late because of their pockets getting hurt. But Americans, for a long time, what's the expression? The fat, happy Americans, dumbed down as they are, they never paid much attention to America's foreign policy. If they had, they would be aware of how America has fucked over. All right, especially the so-called third world nations. And then they turn around, and what does former President Trump, when he was in office, what did he call them? These places they fucked over? He calls them shitholes. Well, you're the reason in most of the cases that these places are shitholes. All right? After you've exploited them for whatever they had. Anyway, continuing on, the systemic structure of the inner city is such that those who make it out are exceptions, and not the rule. In fact, you want to know how to make a criminal? Here's how. Raise a child in poverty, send that child to school, to his assigned neighborhood school, which is already overcrowded and underfunded. Grade teachers on classroom control and not students' performance. Leave that child to his porch, where he can see things, shiny things, bigger things than the things he owns. Watch as he plays. That's my car. When a dope whip rides by, let him bake in the stew of lack for long enough and watch as he rises to hop off the porch. It's not accidental that in 2019, young black men make up only 50% of all youth across the United States and some 41% of youths in the system. Because what all the stories have gotten wrong, what all of the stories written about the murder capital myths, is that abundance of lack. They don't talk about the history of American violence that DC and every city like it mirrors to this day. Gangs fight over land that isn't theirs because it's a claiming of things. America was built on a turf war. American museums are filled with stolen goods. Think of Gad, the so-called North American Indian. They're Israelites. I quoted Numbers 35 and 33 very early on. Let's get that real quick because I want to read it verbatim because, let's see, Numbers 35, 33. Let this sink in. Numbers 35 and 33. So ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are. For blood it defileth the land. And the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. And these devils, these terrorists, these Edomites, these so-called white people have shed a lot of blood around the world. And call things that are not theirs, theirs. Thereby what? Removing the landmark, which you are not supposed to do. Let's go to Deuteronomy 19 and 14. Salaki. It says, thou shalt not, this is the second book of the law, right? Deuteronomy. For those Christians. Thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark, which they of old time have set in thine inheritance, which thou shalt inherit in the land that the Lord thy power, this is Israel, giveth thee to possess. Let's go to another one. Let's see, that is Proverbs. Oops, I went to Isaiah. What the hell is that wrong with that? Let's see, hold on. Proverbs, is it 20? Wait a minute. Let's see. Whoops, hold on. Oh, sensitive again. Here it is. Proverbs 22 and 28. Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. Because what happened early on, I was back in Deuteronomy. Let's go to 32. This is how the Most High separated the nations. Deuteronomy 32 and 8, he says, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, you so-called devils, yours was Mount Seir. You took that from the Horites. All right? When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. See, so you've been in violation of the law for a very long time. America is nothing if not violent, and the violence enacted in black communities is a microcosm of all the years of violence enacted upon their ancestors. It's the slaves that, when freed, owned slaves themselves. It's the learned behavior of violence passed down like a recipe written on parchment paper that is barely visible. Yet the maker can still bring out all the flavors of those who made it before them. It's the memory of violence, the repetition of violence, the practice of violence that makes the act of violence as normal as America itself. In fact, it's the American way. And here's another something that I'm going to go into real quick that I've always said and use an example in my videos. It's not so much Stockholm Syndrome as we've come to know. It goes deeper than that. And it's something called, hold on, colonial, and they did a good job in describing what I'm going into, mindset or mentality. All right, either one will do. It give you the same definition. Colonial mentality. And this is Jake. All right, as a result of all the oppression. It says a colonial mentality, but we know this is, of course, as a result of the curses. That's why you can't just get over it like these devils would like you to. Because it'll tell you here, there's a certain T word I want you to pay particular attention to. A colonial mentality is the internalized attitude of ethnic or cultural inferiority felt by people as a result of colonialization or colonization. Them being colonized by another group. It corresponds with the belief that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior to one's own. The term has been used by post-colonial scholars to discuss the, here it is, transgenerational effects of colonialism present in former colonies following decolonization. Let's go into that transgeneration, because this is the issue. This is not because I believe Stockholm Syndrome was coined around 1973, and we're talking about as a result of only a few days to a couple of weeks, something like that, you know, being held hostage, and you start to agree with your the people that are holding you hostage. It says transgenerational trauma is the psychological and physiological effects that the trauma experienced by people has on subsequent generations in that group. Generations. There are two types of transmission. Intergenerational transmission, whereby epigenetic changes are passed down from the directly traumatized generation to their offspring. And transgenerational transmission, when the offspring then pass it down to their offspring, who have not been exposed to the initial trauma event. In that J, exposure includes when the offspring is in utero. These devils knew exactly what they were doing. All right, so I will put this in the link also. Let me bookmark that real quick. Yeah, that's why we keep saying, why would you want to stay here? Because as long as this devil is over us, he's going to ensure that we stay right where we are, at the very least. And if he can get away with doing away with us all together, that's what he wants, because we are in the way of this new world order, the way he wants things set up. They are a godless people. All these, churches and all this is a front. He used that, meaning the scriptures, our book, as a means to an end to get his foot in the door. Because what? It allows him access. That's all it was. That's all it was ever about. With all this gay shit and all these laws being passed to protect these degenerates, this is his this is him. This is him being exposed. This is his nature. Let's end it with this. This is, going back to Deuteronomy again. Deuteronomy 32 and 32. Let's go there. This is him. Because all the gods that he worshiped, where did he get them from? The Canaanites, who you would call, they are the Hamites. All right? So-called true Africans, which we are not, that they call the day. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 32. For their vine is of the vine of Sodom, and of the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of gall, their clusters are bitter. 33. Their wine, their philosophy, their doctrine is the poison of dragons and the cruel venom of aspen. People are seeing this now. They're sick of this democracy bullshit because it represents nothing but death. Every country that adopts it, now they got homosexuals, other things related. Just sexual perversion and deviancy. All right, and crooked politicians. I remember when I talked about as the elder Malcolm in Chicago, the democracy grenade. They're tired of this shit. All right. Hey, so with that, for time's sake, once again, this is here in D.C., which is the story, but it's about every city in America where these games were played with our people. Hey, so with that, shalom.